I am Lori Blong, and I'm so excited to be here with you today on the Catwalk podcast. I'm a lifelong Midlander. I was born and raised in Midland. I'm now raising my family in Midland and running a business with my husband. We have 3 kids, and they're all in various different pursuits. And we're happy to be Midlanders and excited about the future of Midland. And then for the last 18 months, I've been the Midland City Mayor. And so I'm very excited to be here and to share a little bit of my story. So thank you for having me on the Catwalk podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Catwalk. I'm your host Jay Whitlow, and I'm always joined by Chris over on the controls. The Catwalk's nonprofit of the week is the Aphasia Center of West Texas. At the Aphasia Center, they are improving the quality of life for all impacted by aphasia by overcoming communication barriers. Find them today at aphasiawtx.org. Collaboration is paramount to the Catwalk, and Second Story Co-working is a strategical place to network and host meetings conveniently located in downtown Midland. Connect today at secondstory.co. Discover the new Catwalk Media Group in the Permian Basin. We're empowering your brand with visual storytelling, podcasts, video production, website design, social media management, and so much more. Connect with us today at catwalkmediagroup.com. Please welcome Mayor Lori Blong. Welcome to the Catwalk.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so grateful that you are here today, but I gotta ask you a couple questions because I've heard you speak a couple times, and I'm very impressed by your presentation and the style in which you present. But I do have to ask you, do you have a mayor walk-up song? Like in baseball, they have the walk-up song. Do you have one?
I don't have one of those. I need to think about what it would be. I'm not even sure. That's a great idea.
You know, I've interviewed several people and asked them that question, and I had former Mayor Peyton on, and I was like, do you have something? He was like, I have an entire Spotify list. So do you have something maybe like you're sitting out in the car and you've got that song that's going to hype you up before you walk in to speak?
I do have a song that I listen to on the way to council meetings, and it is by Audrey Assad, and it is basically a prayer, but it's Lord, let me be humble. Let me be what you've called me to be. And so anyway, yes, I do have a song, but it's not a hype song. It's a get in the mode, get my brain and my heart right for what I'm about to do.
Right. That's awesome. I used to, in ministry, we would have certain songs, and if it was a song that wasn't a church song, it was like, oh my gosh, you're listening to that? Yeah. So, and I'm not a country western fan. I'm a
total country western fan. If I'm just listening to music, then I listen to country and western.
Okay. Well, tell us about some of our viewers, listeners that may not live in the Permian Basin, may not know anything about you. Those that live here know you're our mayor. But we would love just to get a background, just real quickly on you. Tell us about your family.
Sure. Yeah, I was born and raised here. My dad was in the oil business, worked for Fasken Oil and Ranch for his whole career. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom and was really blessed to have her there and so responsive to my sister and I. I have one sister, and I'm the oldest. And so we grew up here. I went to Rusk and Lamar, and then Midland Christian, and then SJ, and Midland Freshman, and Midland High. So that's kind of my trajectory through Midland. I graduated high school a year early. I had played sports and had an injury and a complication, and so I wasn't going to be able to play sports anymore. And so I decided, you know what, I think I'm done. I'm done with the high school experience. I had enough credits, and so I took a couple of, 1 or 2 extra classes, correspondence, and then was able to graduate a year early. Went on to Hardin-Simmons University and had a great experience there, but then graduated from college in 3 years also. So then I'm 20 years old, and I am ready to launch into the world. And so that was kind of an interesting, kind of looked up and realized, oh gosh, I think now I have to be a grown-up, and I don't know if I'm ready to be a grown-up at 20. So ended up meeting my husband in my last semester at Hardin-Simmons, and we got married about 8 or 9 months later, and moved to El Paso and became a teacher, and was kind of disgruntled about becoming a teacher. It wasn't actually what I had planned for myself. And so, yeah. So
what did you teach?
I taught high school social studies at El Paso Coronado, and I was able to get postgraduate teacher certification really quickly because I had a psychology and a history minor, and so I was able to ramp up and get going and get a job in El Paso quickly. And so did that, but I taught for 5 years, and I enjoyed the teaching part of it, but I really didn't like the dynamics of a lot of the rest of the job, the politics of it, and a bunch of the other things. And so really was sort of a brat to Jared the whole time we lived in El Paso, and wasn't very happy about things. And we lived there for a total of about 6 years after we got married. So,
Wow.
yeah.
He is probably going to watch this, so you just said
he'll
that
agree.
about you,
He
so
will
yeah,
say yes,
okay.
that's correct.
Now you said something about a sports injury. What did you play, and what happened?
I played basketball and ran a little cross country and track also, but I have something called compartment syndrome. I actually still have it.
Compartment
Syndrome, and it's chronic. It is something that my fascia around my muscles doesn't expand as my muscles expand, and they get really pressured up. And so I've had to have 2 surgeries on each leg to be able to get me functional.
Yeah.
But it's still something that creeps up and is a problem if I.
Were you good at basketball?
I wasn't the best. I was competitive and I enjoyed it
That's
a lot,
humble.
and I got
That's
to
humble.
play. But I enjoyed it a lot. I wasn't headed for a D1 athlete or anything like that, but I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, I know we're going to cover some stuff about being mayor of Midland, and appreciate all that you're doing for our community and the city. I want to talk about Octane a little bit, but let's start at Hardin Simmons. So why did you choose Hardin Simmons? That seems like a far away, not too far away from Midland, but far enough to be away from mom and dad.
That's right. Abilene, 2 hours away from Midland. Both of my grandparents actually graduated from Hardin Simmons, and I heard them tell fond stories of that. I really respected my grandparents a lot. He was a pastor, and she was a teacher, and they were just a blessing to my family and a blessing in my upbringing. And so I think in a large part I patterned that after them. There was also a scholarship from, I grew up here in Midland, as I've already said multiple times, but went to First Baptist in Midland, and they had a scholarship for ministry. And so I went to Hardin Simmons thinking that I would go into ministry. I got the Wayne Scott Lacey Scholarship and a couple of other scholarships that helped to defray that cost. And so went to Hardin Simmons, ended up being on staff for Pioneer Drive Baptist Church, and then later for a little church called Cross Point Fellowship. And so the whole time that I was there, that was the trajectory that I was on. Really loved I was in student congress the whole time I was at Hardin Simmons, and enjoyed that. My first experience, I guess, for running for office, for the elected student congress seat. And then I was enrolled actually my senior years when I met my husband Jared at Hardin Simmons, and then that summer, he and I were dating, but I went ahead and enrolled at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. That was my plan, to go and continue my pathway in ministry, and decided I'd rather get married. I loved this man and wanted to marry him, and so I abandoned those plans for seminary and moved to El Paso at that point.
How did he propose to you?
Well, let me tell you, the real way that he proposed was he was
so there's
driving.
2 ways
There's
then,
kind
right?
of 2 proposals. There was the, hey, are we going to do this kind of proposal, and then there was a formal proposal.
There was the guy way, and then
He made it right.
yeah.
So he proposed.
right.
He proposed. Really, he was driving back and forth from El Paso to Abilene because I was still there, and he was driving back from Abilene to El Paso for a meeting that he had the next day. And it was the middle of the night, and I was worried that he was going to drive off the road or whatever. And he was like, "We just need to get married. This is crazy. We can't keep doing this." And I'm like, "Okay, that's
save on gas.
yeah, exactly." And so I called First Baptist before I even talked to anybody else. Didn't tell my mom or my college roommates. I called the pastor's secretary at First Baptist and said, "We'd like this date. Is it available at the church?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Don't tell my mom, because she'll kill me." I don't even know if my mom knows that. So anyway,
She does now.
Susan Upham hooked me up and got the church reserved before I ended up having to. So then a few weeks later, Jared had a ring and everything. And so he surprised me at Wall Street Bar and Grill, actually.
Have you ever wanted to go back into ministry?
I have actually talked about it, and I've dipped my toe in the water a couple of different times since we've been married, where I've worked in various capacities. One at Coronado Baptist Church in El Paso, while I was teaching part-time, and then I was the associate children's minister at Coronado Baptist Church for a while, not for a very long period of time. And then I've pretty much consistently either taught high school Sunday school or women's Bible study, or I really enjoy the Bible teaching aspect of that.
Did you enjoy being a high school teacher?
I enjoyed the teaching component. I did not love all the rest of it. I think part of it too was my husband was in a really professional job with JDW Insurance when we lived in El Paso, and had a lot of professional advancement and a lot of opportunities for social engagement and other things. And I resented this upwardly mobile pathway that he seemed to have, and I was stuck in this job that I had taken because we needed the money, but I didn't really want to do it. And so a lot of it was my own resentment, my own bad attitude, if I'm being honest, that caused me to not like it. So.
So you guys had kids while you were in El Paso?
Our first two children were born in El Paso.
Okay.
So we had Merritt. We got married when I was barely 21 years old, and we had our oldest daughter Merritt when I was 23.
Okay.
And then 3 years later, we had our son Caleb, and then we moved within a few weeks of his birth to Brownwood.
And how long were you in Brownwood?
We were in Brownwood for just under 2 years, and I loved Brownwood. It was a great place to live.
Great lake there.
It was a great lake. And that was part of what made me love it. My parents let us store their boat where we lived. So I would have dinner in a cooler and my two babies already loaded up, and I would go back the boat in the water and have it ready. And then Jared and I would ski until dark, and our kids would eat,
Those were the days.
Those were the days. It was just simple, and I loved it. It was great.
And then you guys from Brownwood, did you come to Midland?
We came from Brownwood to Midland.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at that point, somewhere around there, you got into oil and gas.
So we came back to Midland thinking it would just be short term. My dad was really sick with cancer, and we knew that he might not have just a whole lot longer. We moved back in 2011, and he passed away in 2013. Wow. And so we came back to be, just close to my family, not thinking that we would be there long term. And so I'm so thankful that we did that. But we ended up really loving being back in Midland. And Jared took a job with Western Drilling at the time. He was their risk manager. And at one point, it was almost as though the owner walked into his office and said, "Here's the keys to the company. Don't wreck the truck." Wow. And so Jared had the opportunity to learn a lot of things, some of them the hard way, as is often the case. But he had the opportunity to learn a lot of things about the drilling business and really fell in love. Right. But he got to help manage payroll, and there were just a lot of components of that weren't really in his job description or what he thought he was coming to do. Right. And so then he decided, so that was 2011 when he took that job. We moved back. 2013, he went to Randy Ford and said, "I would like to build a more high-tech drilling rig. You guys seem happy with what you've got here, and it's working well for you. I don't want to go into competition with you, but I'd like to go and build. I have this rig idea. Are you interested in my rig idea, first of all?" And Randy said, "No, I like what I've got going." And Jared said, "Well, then I'd like to go and see if I can make a go of this." And Randy, they kind of had a gentleman's agreement: don't poach my people, I won't poach yours. Right. And a parting of ways. And so 2013, Jared went out on his own, and I started helping with some back office support at that point. This is our family deal. We're going to make it go. I was pregnant with our third baby, and that year was a really difficult year. We stake our life savings in this new business, and I have our third child and terrible postpartum depression that I was struggling through. My dad passed away. We lost two grandparents between us, and so it was just a perfect storm of changes in our life. And so it was a really difficult year.
Could you see God's hand in the middle of all that? And what was maybe he teaching you at that time?
I think really, you've probably heard a theme of me being kind of bratty in certain circumstances. And I think it was really, I had a plan for how I felt like my life was going to go. And, I didn't end up going to seminary, and that was my decision. And I'm so thankful I married Jared, but I carried a resentment with me in that. And then I was resentful in El Paso, and there were just various different things. There was joy in our life, and things, a lot of things were going well, but I had this attitude of I'm missing out on something that was really my plan. And I think 2013 was a breaking point for me to realize this is not about my plan. This is about paying attention to where the Lord is leading our family and leading us into the future. And so I think there was a lot of growth for me through that period. And I went through, I ended up on medication actually for postpartum depression. I went to therapy and worked through some things there, but also just had an internal reset of I'm going to contribute to my family. I'm going to contribute to the things that are around me, and I'm going to make things better around me instead of griping and complaining.
I applaud you for that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So you and Jared started Octane, right? And I know in the bio you guys have been awarded in 17 and 18, recognized by Inc. magazine as like a top organization.
The fastest growing, I think,
Fastest
is
growing.
what it was.
What's it like being in business like that with your husband?
So Jared
spouse?
Jared and I have really strong personalities, both of us. We know who we are and what we're about and where we're headed. And so I think that there's often times where we butt heads and we have differences of opinion. Some of those get a little spicy just in terms of we have a kind of a square off in the kitchen and say what you need to say sort of a relationship.
That's where your executive team meets, is in the kitchen,
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I'm not going to say that it's always been cupcakes and rainbows and really picturesque. Some of it's been difficult and we've struggled through that. But I think we have the same goals long term, to have a family that is sustained by this, but also that we would care well for people. We like the team aspect of running a business and building a team that is successful and sustainable. And so some of the people that we've worked with have become our best friends and people that we really care a lot about. And so I think because we have like-minded goals, we have like-minded approaches to certain things, that's been good. I will tell you the places where it's gone well is because he knows what his role is in a certain project and I know what my role is, and we stay in that. The places where it's gone badly are where we've had overlapping roles and we get in each other's way and it doesn't go very well.
There's no clear communication in that. Do you have a better title than he does?
For a long time, he was CEO and president, and I don't even remember what my title was. And then he stepped out of the business for 2 years and went and pursued a different endeavor. And so I was there as the CEO and president for a while. And then he came back, and I'm like, I ain't going back to,
back.
So I think right now we're co-founders. And so.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that honesty about how it's not always perfect. I think a lot of times people do that. They try to paint that rosy picture when they're on a podcast or they're in the news or they're in the public and stuff. And I think as your figure in the public eye, that for you to be honest in that, I think is great. And again, I just applaud the business and where you're at. I do want to know as we transition into your time as mayor, what have you seen being a teenager growing up in Midland and coming back? What's some of the differences that you've seen in the city?
Before we started the cameras, we talked about the fact that I never thought I would come back to Midland. You know, I really did never, that was not what I intended when I was graduating high school. And to be fair, you know, at one point during my senior year of high school, or maybe junior year of high school, it was, you know, oil was trading at $8 a barrel in the late 90s. And so nobody was growing up here at that point thinking, you know what, this is awesome. I think I'll come back and make my life in this industry and in this community. It was rough times. You know, I had a friend whose dad committed suicide and you know, because of a business situation. There were just a lot of hard things through the 90s in Midland, and many of us remember those things. So I moved away not thinking I would come back. And I think coming back and now being in the role that I'm in, I see some of those same things that I was frustrated about, but so much has evolved in the last, 30 years in Midland. And a lot of those evolutions had to take place just because the world is a different place. But I think some of that is really standing on the shoulders of leadership that has taken place between the 90s to today. People who've made investments in our community, whether that be municipal investments or philanthropic investments or business investments. There's been a lot of a change in perspective to give back to this community in a way that maybe it was happening when I was a kid, but I didn't see it at that point.
Right.
And I now I can see evidence of it everywhere. So much investment has been made in Midland.
I hear that a lot from lifelong Midlanders, even though they've moved away, come back. I'm not a Midlander. I married somebody from the other side of the streets in Odessa, and she said we will never move back, and that's a death sentence. And so we move back.
Yep. Never say never.
So you see from running in city council and the leadership there and the leadership now as mayor, what does Midland do well?
I think Midland knows what our identity is, and our identity is to be in oil and gas leadership and to make investments and lead the way in oil and gas innovation. I think we have some service companies that really show the world how to optimize what it is that they do well, whether that's a chemical company or a tubulars company or whatever you're dealing with. I think Midland has consistently demonstrated that innovation comes from the Permian Basin in the oil and gas business. And I would say that the same is true for a lot of our operators. We have a lot of operators, whether they be small or mid-sized or small family shops. Operators here are willing to push the boundaries of what can and can't be done to optimize our industry. So I think we have that identity and we know what it is. And even when we kind of falter in that identity during a downturn or during hard circumstances, I think that identity has held strong.
Right. Well, could you help me, because I don't know this answer to this question. I've heard you speak and stuff. What was it? Was there one moment, maybe at home or at work or somewhere, where you said, I'm going to step out, I'm going to do city council, and then eventually I'm going to do mayor?
I think it was an evolution over time. It was not one moment where I went from I'm going to be a housewife and a mom and working with my spouse in this business. It was an evolution. And so over a period of time, part of it was while I was working through some of those difficulties from 2013, for me to really realize I want to make sure that I'm contributing well to this place that I live. Probably the most impactful was I listened to a woman named Jill Briscoe give a talk at the IF gathering in Dallas, and she said 3 things that really changed me forever. And if you've heard me talk, you've probably heard me talk about these 3 things. But the first thing that she said was that your primary place of calling is right where you are, between your own 2 feet. It's not a future version of you. It is not what you wish you were doing that you chose not to do when you were younger. Your primary place of calling is right now. And if you're not serving there faithfully, then you're missing your primary place of calling. And then the second thing she said was you have to do it scared sometimes. The thing that you're primarily called to is probably scary to you. But the confidence and the ability to press forward, and it comes on the other side of stepping forward and taking the chance. And then the last thing that she said was that you stay where you're, or I'm sorry, let me see if I can say it properly. You go where you're sent, you stay where you're put, and you give what you've got until the job is done. And I have found that to be true, that Midland is the place where I've been sent. And I'm going to stay here and give what I've got to this job until the job is done. And I think sometimes that calling and that job evolves and it changes, and God's primary place of calling through circumstances and other things, sometimes that moves and it changes and it evolves. But you have to be faithful to stay and complete it, and don't be constantly looking or wishing for the next thing.
Yeah. I had a mentor in my life. He served over in England for quite some time. And I remember when I was standing in the streets of York, England, listening to his testimony, his passionate speech or whatever, he said very similar to what Jill had said in the talk at IF gathering. It was, wherever your feet are, that's where your mission is.
That's right.
So wherever you're standing. And if you're standing in your home, that's your mission field. If you're standing in a business as the executive or the forklift driver, that's your mission.
That's right.
Wherever it is that you're standing, your mission. Also, know leadership is a vital part of who you are. It's a vital part of, I'm assuming, being in a city leadership position. And I've read a lot of leadership books, and I know that people don't leave bad jobs; they leave bad leaders, right? So, what would your leadership style be? Do you have a leadership style?
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with my husband about this. I don't know what the term would be. I'm definitely not a micromanager. I give what I believe is the trajectory that we're on, the vision for where we're headed, and then I expect people to own their piece of it. So I want people to feel empowered to do their job, but I am really, really strong in accountability. I'm going to check back and see if you did what I asked you to do, and I expect you to get it done. But I think that it's really, really important to make sure that everyone knows where we're headed together first. So not just to be a punitive, you didn't do what I told you to do, but more, are you pulling in the same way? Are you rowing in the same direction as the rest of the team to accomplish the goal that's been set forward? I think strategic planning is very important to be able to set goals for the year and to be able to work towards those goals and then be accountable to whether or not you accomplish them. So our city council has set a strategic plan with our staff, and we tie everything back to those strategic goals. And Jared and I do something similar, usually in the month of December, where we sit down and we talk about what are our strategic goals for our family, what are our strategic goals for our business, do we have personal or ministry goals? All of those things are a part of a conversation, and then we tie that back to be able to have accountability to that.
Right. I know when new businesses are launched or there's people that are moving into town, a lot of times you hear people say, fly them in at night. Right? Don't let them look at Midland in the daytime. What do you say to that? How does that make you feel? Because you said you don't ascribe to that. So what does that say to you when someone mentions that?
I think Midland has a lot that we need to be proud of, and we need to quit trying to fly people in at night and not be who we are. I think that we live in the desert. We need to own that, and we need to talk about beautiful sunsets and sunrises, and we need to talk about what it feels like when La Mesa blows in on a really windy day. And, we don't have to love every single aspect of it, but I think it's a mistake to hide those things, the good or the bad. It's a mistake to cover those up or to pretend like they don't exist. Let's own those things. Let's talk about where we're making improvements where we can, and then let's laugh about it when La Mesa blows in and we can't do anything about it. I think that there's the wall of brown dirt coming from the north is inevitably going to be happening here, and it's part of who we are. And so our ability to laugh those things off, but to press into the good things that we're doing, the places where we're evolving and changing, I think is critically important.
I like the good old days. We talked about that earlier, some of that. If you could bring back Blockbuster, would you bring that back if you had the power to do that?
Yeah, I really, really loathe all of the technology that has taken over our lives. I think that we've missed something in getting to go back to Blockbuster and make a plan for the evening.
We have that. I thought about, it's like, what questions do I want to ask and stuff. And, I could say, hey, could you take care of some parking tickets that I have and Blockbuster overdue fees and stuff. But could you bring Blockbuster back? That would be great. What do you see some of the needed changes in Midland? You talked about what we do well. I don't want to talk about potholes. I don't want to talk about all that stuff that stirs everybody up. But what are some things you see that are some changes that you see coming or that are needed?
Yeah, I think that if I were to talk about that, I would talk about it more in a esoteric thing. I think we could all talk about stores we wish we had, or things like that we'd like economic development to happen in X way or whatever. I wouldn't focus it on that. I would talk about bigger picture things. I think one of our primary issues is always going to be water. We live in West Texas, and we live in a climate that has long periods of drought, and we always have, we always will. And so we need to make sure that we have a long-term perspective for that. And we've made huge strides, even as recently as yesterday in our city council meeting on July 23rd. We were able to secure a 100-year water plan and get phase one going on that with Fort Stockton Holdings. That's a huge win. But we have a lot of work to be done to ever bring that water from Fort Stockton to Midland. So just because we have the water and we have a plan for that water doesn't mean that we've executed that plan. And so it's important to me to continue to execute that plan well and make sure we have redundancy. We've had some problems, and certainly our neighbors in regions around Midland have had problems because we don't have a redundant plan. If there's a failure in the main pipeline coming from T-Bar, we have a problem on our hands in Midland. And so we need the redundancy, and we need the volumes of water to be able to take this community into the future for growth. So that's a big one. I think another one is just the next generation of leadership and philanthropy in this community. We had really strong boomer leaders, and still have many of them in their places, but some of them are retiring and they're moving away, and they're looking for the next season of their life, as they should be. And I think that we have, in certain cases, we have vacancies of where the person is ready to step out, or maybe they've already stepped out of that leadership role, and we don't have a person stepping in terms of and I don't necessarily mean the title, I mean the true leadership to carry us into the next season of municipal government leadership or county government leadership or in philanthropy in this community, we have things that are old, infrastructure that's old that needs to be replaced, and we have buildings that are old. We have just a community that in some parts of town is aging. Other parts of town are brand new and fresh, and we're so excited about them.
Right.
But we have to look at it holistically. So we need those next generation of leaders to continue to step up and take that accountability and authority in those places. And then the third thing is what we've already talked about, but it's owning who we are and doing those things well. Let's don't apologize for who we are and what we do well, but then also how do we continue to talk about diversification? And I think diversification might look like a totally new industry. We have some things in the works with the Air and Spaceport, the Midland Air and Spaceport. We have several government contractors that are looking to do development and expansion of their efforts here in our area because of that spaceport license. We have access to some of those government contractors for weapon systems and for munitions and other things that are actually, some of them are already being tested here in Midland, and we don't even, Joe Blow Midlander doesn't know about that. But it's an opportunity for us. It's a viable economic opportunity that's already growing and expanding in our region. We need to pour into that, and we need to applaud that. We need to get behind it, and we need to look for ways that we can expand it. And I think there's a couple of other similar things that are coming down the pike that would be diversification, but we can't lose sight of who we are in that process. So let's own who we are and seek to reasonably diversify as well.
I like that phrase, own who we are. Don't hide from it. I think that's great. Are you constantly, I'm assuming, constantly making yourself better as a leader? Are you reading materials? You're listening to podcasts? Where do you find that influence?
I voraciously read, and I usually have two books going. I usually have one that's a novel and a story that I enjoy, and I'm listening to that for pleasure. And then I have another one that's usually a leadership book or some other kind of I like theology books, so something that's kind of educational or instructive to me, and then something that's just for pleasure. So right now, I'm rereading Anne of Green Gables. It's my favorite book from childhood. Yeah. It's also my daughter, one of her favorite books. So she's at the Naval Academy, and so as I'm writing her letters, I'm sending her quotes from Anne of Green Gables as part of my letters. Yeah. So just a fun thing to do.
I wanted to applaud you for that, of your daughter being at Naval Academy. I think that's awesome. Did you guys go up there and see that whole process?
We
and
did.
I'm sure that made you even more proud of the country and of her and stuff. What's next for after mayor? Is there something else? I mean, what's next for Octane? What's next for you?
I think Octane has grown and evolved in the years. We're 11 years old now as a company, and so we've already evolved quite a bit. We've gone from being a well site consulting firm and Jared never did build the rigs that he wanted to build when we first started it. So it's evolved from its very inception. Wow. So we still have the well site consulting component, but it's mostly for things that we're co-invested in, or we're doing a turnkey project where we're helping a company get a project completed. We also have operations of our own, and then we purchased a contract operating company where we do contract operations for other operators. And so I think expansion of that, and further, I think we have interest in getting into operations of our own even further, acquiring additional assets and continuing to develop those.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Where's the best place to watch a West Texas sunset?
The best place to watch a West Texas sunset is probably right now at Nueva Vista. So I live in West Midland, in the golf course that has been closed, just because it's sort of on a rise, and you get to see the sunset there to the west of Nueva Vista.
That is nice.
I think it's going to continue to be a cool sunset, even after the development of the zoo and of the preserve that are going to be developed on that land. I'm excited about that.
I thought that was an easy question because I didn't want to say where's your best place to eat and get a donut and stuff, because that's going to alienate some. And I'm like, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to be that guy. But I want to wrap things up. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
One thing I always like to ask people when they're here is we're sitting at this table having a conversation, who, and I think I may know a little bit of this because of the ministry background, but who's influence in your life? Who do you allow to sit at your table and pour into you?
Yeah. My dad was probably one of the greatest influences in my life. My mom as well, but my dad really set a tone for leadership for me. And so there are things that he taught me that I find myself implementing daily in my parenting and in my business and in my home and in even in my role as mayor, although he never pursued anything like that. He had a really strategic leadership style, and I try to implement some of those things. My husband is also a strong influence in my decision making, and then it is very important to me to stay tied into the gospel and to make sure that my actions and my words and the things that I'm doing and pursuing align with my faith in Jesus.
Yeah. What do you want to be known for?
I really, more than I want to, there are some projects that I'm working on that I'd like to be known for those things because they're important and I think Midland needs them. But more than anything like that, I want to be known for gracious leadership. Even in a hard situation, in a hard discussion, in a hard thing that our community is facing, I want to be gritty and I want to be resilient in pursuing a solution, but I want to do it graciously. And I think that there is a line to be navigated as a leader, to be bold and resilient and gritty, but also to do it with graciousness and to bring people along, to assimilate them in, and to come to solutions that are best for everybody.
Wow.
So,
well, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership. I'm proud that you're our mayor, and you come back anytime.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Mayor Lori Blong, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe on all of our platforms. A big shout out to Chris on the controls for making this happen. Also, the Aphasia Center of West Texas is our nonprofit of the week. Second Story Co-working is a great place for you to do co-working space downtown. And then also the new podcast production, graphic design, website building company in Midland. That's ours, the Catwalk Media Group. Check us out at catwalkmediagroup.com. See you next week.